Mm.
All right. Thank you very much, Jared. Welcome to Ecclesiastes, Bible for Friends. We're in chapter 5. We're going to be closing out chapter 5 today. And if we get to chapter 6, then my good friend Spencer will be sharing the study in that, leading the study for that chapter. Let's get started. So we are in verse 13. This chapter has been talking a lot about wealth and the problems that come with the love of money. In the last few verses, um, we saw uh, that one of the things about loving money is that you can never have enough. And so once you start accumulating wealth and you reach a level where you wanted to reach and you're satisfied, there's always going to be a point where you're going to want more. That level that will satisfy you will increase and keep increasing. And so it's a never ending cycle. And you're never going to be satisfied by devoting your life to accumulating wealth. We're going to continue in that vein today. Welcome, Anthony. Thank you for joining us.
Anthony.
Good to see you. Uh, verse 13. There is a sickening evil which I have seen under the sun, wealth being hoarded by its owner to his detriment. When that wealth was lost through bad business, and he had fathered a son, then there was nothing to support him. As he came naked from his mother's womb, so he will return as he came. He will take nothing from the fruit of his labor that he can carry in his hand. Wow. So some really tough verses, and I'll just tell you, as I was studying these last few verses of Ecclesiastes 5, I felt that I was one person in particular that needed to hear this because I feel like that's one of the areas that I've struggled with is uh, letting money control my happiness, my emotions, and wanting to. I'm more of a saver, and I've allowed money to sometimes affect my peace, my relationships, and so I really think that these verses are speaking really close to my heart, and so I don't know if anybody else might share this, but these are just some really hard verses and very confronting verses, I will say. Um, to just warning, forewarning. Um, so there's no source of wealth that is free from risk. As we're seeing here, is that money and wealth is very fragile, and that's not to say that there's some investments that are have less risk than others that you can manage your risk. Um, but all investments have risk. There's nothing that is guaranteed to to generate you wealth or to stay at the same um, level of growth. Um, and right now we're living at a time where that is being demonstrated on a very large scale with all the markets in the US and probably a lot of other countries dropping by 10% or more. I think the NASDAQ, the S&P 500, Dow Jones, they're all down by a lot. NASDAQ in particular, because they have a lot of tech stocks. Um, and it seems like the markets that have uh, given the most returns in the last few years um, are the ones that are causing the greatest losses now, of course, because they're more volatile, like the market of crypto. The crypto market is dropped by more than a quarter in 2022 in just a few weeks. And so it's just to me it's kind of shocking to see how overnight people have lost billions, and how unstable wealth is. Um, and teaches, I think it's a big lesson to not put our faith in material things, but rather to trust in the person who owns all things, the owner of all things. by following his instructions. So another point that I see from these verses is that what really stands out about someone is not how much money that person has, but what he does with the money that he does have, he or she, I should say. So in verse 14, it talks about the tragedy of somebody who, through some bad business decisions, loses his money, doesn't even have enough to support his child, his son. And one of our calling is men. The designs of given by God to men is to be providers, to be givers, and we talked about that in a previous lesson. And, we even see Paul, the Apostle Paul, making a really harsh statement about the importance of providing for one's family. In 1 Timothy 5:8, it says, "But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." So one of the things to keep in mind is that faith and obeying God has a lot to do with how we use our wealth to provide for others, especially for those that are within our control, our family, and our household. So that's a really strong point to take to heart, is that it's worse to not provide for your household than to be an unbeliever. And then, as I mentioned before, one of the things that we also see from these few verses is that all the wealth that exists in the world belongs to God, because he is the king of the universe. And he allows us, it's not that we own anything, but he allows us to have some of the wealth that is all his for the purpose of learning generosity. So money does have a purpose, and that purpose is not to be the center of our lives, but to be used to be generous to others, and not to hoard it all for ourselves, for our detriment, as it says in verse 13. And the last important principle in this portion that I've seen is that we can't take that we can't take anything in this world. Because we come into this world with nothing, and it's inevitable that when we die, that we're going to leave with nothing as well. And so, what's the point of accumulating more and more material things if we're not going to be taking any of it with us into the next life, which is going to be above the sun, and even more so considering that we don't even know, when our time will come, when our last day is. We don't know if tomorrow we will be around. So what's the meaning of stressing over accumulating wealth in the world? It's better to be content with what we're able to accumulate by just striving and working hard and doing our best than worrying about not having as much as somebody else, or coveting any amount of money or wealth. So any questions or comments about those few verses?
So one thing I was going to add, I'm trying to remember the exact point you had mentioned, but there's a lot of reference that Dave Ramsey talks about with wealth. And one of the big things that he kind of mentions to his listeners is that when you have a portion of wealth, that part of what you're supposed to do is to basically be like a good steward of that wealth. And kind of tying that into what you were saying about, kind of like giving it and doing the right things with it. He mentions that you're blessed with this wealth basically so that um, like you're being tasked to manage this portion of wealth under God and with the way that He would want you to use it to help others, to give, to serve, and so when he in a lot of his teachings he references that back to the Bible, that whatever you do with the wealth that you do have, you should aim to be a good manager and steward of that, regardless of whatever portion that is.
Wow. Yeah, definitely. I really like that about Dave Ramsey, is that he has the correct perspective about money, and that it's not for ourselves, but it's for generosity. I think that relates to one of the parables that Jesus taught, which was the parables about the talents. And it talks about how there's this um, master who entrusts his servants with different amounts of talents, which is a measure of money in those times. And, most, all but one invested, those talents and made them grow. And they returned with more, and they were praised by the master when he came to check in. But the one who didn't invest them, he just dug it up and dug up a hole in the ground and laid it there, and it didn't grow, it didn't change. He didn't um, invest, and so when he came back, he got scolded by the master, and what he did have was taken from him and given to the one who had grown the most. And so it's this interesting principle that God has, that he who has a lot, more will be given to him, and he who has little, less will be given to him. It's very interesting. And I think it applies more in a spiritual sense, that it's kind of a law of nature that the more you invest in something, the more you're gonna receive from that effort.
Right. Kind of one tie-in, as you were saying that when you mentioned it being a spiritual thing, um, I do really agree with that, because if you think about, or at least what I think about when I hear that, is like you're understanding the significance and the impact that has. And so when you do that on top of understanding the idea that that this has power and kind of an ability to like help or hinder people, if you have that correct respect for it, you're going to manage it properly, and in doing that it's going to yield more for you. Like you said, if somebody's investing it kind of conservatively, they're going to protect it, and then it's going to reap them more, versus if it's like if they're not thinking about it as much in a spiritual sense, they might be more apt to like kind of gamble it, and you kind of can think about how that might go, and hence kind of to your point, those that can manage what they have well will manage more, and those who can't, they'll manage less.
That is a really good point. Yeah, you earn that trust, and so God will trust you with more. Yeah. Wow, that's a really good point. All right. Any other questions or comments? I really like that one, Jared. Thank you very much. All right, let's continue. Oh, yes. And then I also had these verses from Jesus in Matthew chapter 6. He says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and decay destroy, and thieves break in and steal. But store up treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor decay destroys, nor thieves break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there also will be your heart. There also will your heart be." And, so the alternative to storing up our heart's treasure in the things of this world, the material things, is storing up treasures in heaven, in the life above the sun. And I think one of the biggest resources that we have to invest, that we all have the same amount of, is time. We all have 24 hours in the day, and we can all choose how we spend those 24 hours. And we can either choose, to spend them on things that don't edify us, that are not going to feed our spirit, or we can choose to invest in things that are from God's kingdom. And I think right now we're, if our lives go on as is expected, into our 60s or 70s, maybe 80s, then right now we're in a really good time to invest as much as we can in understanding His Word, in studying His Word, and the fruits are going to be incredible, because we'll prepare ourselves for passing that on to the next generation. And not just that, but we'll store up also treasures for the next life. We're going to be investing in the next life. So continuing to verse 16 and 17. This also is a sickening evil. Exactly as a person is born, so will he die. What then is the advantage for him who labors for the wind? All his life he also eats in darkness with great irritation, sickness, and anger. Again, it's that principle of as we are born, that's how we die, with nothing to our name, with nothing in our hands. And it shows us this really important principle that helps to have deeply ingrained in our mind, which is that we don't own anything in the world. The one who owns everything is the King of the universe, which is God. And the simple truth can free us from the stress that comes with materialism, or the obsession with accumulating material things. And so we realize, we don't really own anything, so there's no point in toiling and stressing out about accumulating things, about owning things. It's all vapor. It seems like it's there and then it's gone. And life is really short, and again, there's nothing that we're going to take from this life into the next. And so the result of living a life that is dedicated to only building wealth is what we see in verse 17, which is very sad but very clear, which is a life where we eat in darkness, where we eat in solitude, with great irritation, sickness, and anger. And so one of the consequences of having a life that is really empty, only focused on building wealth for yourself, like it said in the last few verses, is that you're going to be alone, and that's going to lead you to have a lot of frustration and dissatisfaction. It's going to lead to poor health, and that's going to also be accompanied with anger. And so it's just a very sad picture, and a very good illustration by the preacher of whether it's the end of living a materialistic life. Of course, this is like an extreme. There's a balance to managing wealth, as we mentioned earlier, and not making it the center of our lives. This is talking about somebody who makes wealth the center of his life, who's hoarding wealth for himself, so much so that he doesn't even think about others. He doesn't even prepare himself to provide for his family, for his son. Yeah. Any questions, comments? Sounds good. All right, last few verses of chapter 5, verse 18. It says, "Here's what I have seen to be good and fitting, to eat, to drink, and enjoy oneself in all one's labor in which he labors under the sun during the few years of his life which God has given to him, for this is his reward. Furthermore, as for every person to whom God has given riches and wealth, he has also given him the opportunity to enjoy them and to receive his reward and rejoice in his labor. This is the gift of God, for he will not often call to mind the years of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. Wow. It's a really nice alternative to the verses we were seeing before. And one thing I take away from this is when we place our desires in our desires and our hope in the things that are above the sun instead of the things that are in this world under the sun, is that we become like tourists. We realize that we're not here to own anything or to build up something. Everything is not really ours. We don't own anything. We're just entrusted things. We are stewards of the few resources that we are given in this life, and then the few days that we have in this life. And so when you become like a tourist is able to enjoy where he's at. He goes there to enjoy, and he's not stressed out about all the problems that are going on around him. He's just observing and taking in and learning, and that's what we are like in this world. We realize that our hope is not for what is in this world, but for what is above the sun, what is coming after. And so, as it says here, it talks about the few years of one's life. It just gives you a picture of time flying by. And as I say, when you're having fun, when you're enjoying something, time flies by. Because you're not thinking about time. You're not just waiting for something to end. You're just focused, living in the present, living in the moment, and time flies by for you. But then we also see this other picture of God, which is that he's not against wealth, because he says that it's God who gives riches and wealth. But he wants us to have the correct idea about wealth, that it's not going to satisfy us if we make it the center of our lives, and that money can become useless if our attitude towards it is to make it an object of idolatry. If we try to make it like a god to us, and when that happens, then it controls our emotions and our desires. And that's why I was sharing earlier that I feel like these verses have hit really close to home for me, because recently I've had some moments where I'm worried because I don't have enough in my emergency savings account, my God only knows fund, and I've allowed that to remove my peace and to make me feel worried. And what I see here is an opposite idea of how we're supposed to relate to wealth, which is to enjoy what we do have, and to not be worried about having things, about having savings. I say that with caution, because savings are important, but making money the object of our idolatry, making that the condition for being happy and thankful is not good. And so that's what God wants us to know, is that we don't really own anything, and that money doesn't serve as a god, as an idol. It won't satisfy us. And so the purpose of money is that we use it to satisfy our basic needs and to share it with others by learning to be generous. And so I really like that promise that he says in verse 20, where it says that God keeps God keeps the ones that enjoy life busy with the joy in the heart, so much so that they don't seem to notice the years of his life. And again, that's that idea of life flying by, because we're like tourists in this world, when we're just taking things in, we're enjoying, we're learning, and we're grateful for everything that we have. And the other key thing that it says here is that this is a gift that only comes from God. So it's not something that is produced by the world or by humanistic philosophy, but by having the right understanding of how we relate to God and what our purpose is according to what God says in this world. And so a few verses related to this to conclude this chapter, which remind us of this idea of gratitude and contentment. I put here as a title, humility and gratitude. Those are the two keys for contentment. So one of them is Philippians 4:10 through 13, which is one of Spencer's favorite verses. Do you know which one it is, Spencer?
Yeah, it's on my Instagram bio. I think it's all can do anything through Christ who strengthens him.
Yes, that's
Basically,
correct.
yeah. I think that's
Nice. Spencer, could you read the? Oh wait, what? I didn't get the right verses. Sorry. I thought I opened the right one.
you can scroll down, right?
Yeah, I wanted to just read verses 10 through 13. So that's what we'll do. Can you see the screen? Bible Gateway?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Could you read those few verses for us, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at last you have revived your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned before, but you lacked an opportunity to act. Not that I speak from need, for I have learned to be in content in whatever circumstances I am. I know how to get along with little, and I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I've learned the secret of being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me.
Yes. Now you see the context of that verse, which is I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And that if we connect that to Ecclesiastes, where it says that the ability to enjoy life and to just eat and drink and be satisfied only comes through God. It's a gift of God. And so it's something that requires supernatural influence. And you can see the same thing here: is the ability to know how to get by with little and how to live in prosperity as well is something that only is possible through God. In this case, it's something about Jesus actually. Through all, I can do all things through Jesus who strengthens me. What Paul is saying. And then even in the instructions to the Israelites, we see a very similar concept. That's what I'm going to share in the next few verses, which are from Deuteronomy, chapter 8, verse 10 and 19. Can you guys see the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Anthony, are you there?
I'm still here, buddy. I'm not ignoring that.
Sweet. Can you see the screen?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Could you read the verses from 10 to 19 for us?
Do that for you, buddy. When you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God to the good land which he has given you. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God by failing to keep his commandments, his ordinances, and his statutes. Sorry, I had to zoom in. I have to scroll. Which I am commanding you today. Otherwise, you eat and are satisfied, and you build good houses and live in them. And when your herds and your flocks increase, and your silver and gold increase, and everything you have increases, then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He who led you through the great and terrible wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions, and its thirsty ground where there was no water. He who brought water for you out of the rock of flint in the wilderness. It was he who fed you manna which your fathers did not know, in order to humble you in order to put you to the test, to do good for you in the end. Otherwise you may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth. But you are to remember the Lord your God, for he who is giving you power to make wealth in order to confirm his covenants, which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day, and it shall come about, if you ever forget the Lord your God, to and follow other gods and serve and worship them, I testify against you today that you will certainly perish.
Wow, thank you so much, Anthony.
Yeah, of
That was
course.
a marathon. But it's very interesting, that right as they were about to enter the promised land, this was in Deuteronomy, the last book of the Torah, of the first 5 books of the Bible. Moses was instructing the Israelites to remember that once they've eaten and once they had been satisfied and filled, then they had to remember to bless the Lord your God, to pray to him and thank him for everything that he'd given them, because he was reminding them it was God who delivered them from slavery, who made them free, who gave them their freedom. And then on top of that, he was the one that was giving them water and manna, sustenance, and everything that they needed while they were in the desert. And while they were learning to be this important principle of being dependent on God for everything. Because if we don't, then the danger is that we forget him. Once we become comfortable in our wealth, that's the problem with wealth, is that we can become comfortable and forget that God is the one who gives us everything and who provides for everything. And it gives you it also relates it to idolatry. In the end, it says, if you forget the Lord your God and start following other gods and worship them and serve them, then you will certainly perish. And that's kind of what we saw with the consequences in Ecclesiastes of being centered in hoarding wealth, is that you're going to be eating in darkness, you're going to be sick, you're going to be angry, and you're going to be irritated. You're going to have a life that's tending towards death. So interesting, point here that it's not, you don't bless God for the food before you eat, but after you eat, because that's when you're most likely to forget, when you no longer have a need. That's when you have to remind yourself, this is because of God, not because of my own strength that I have this wealth, like it says here. So this concept that the preacher is trying to teach us, to that the ability to enjoy wealth comes from God, is based in the first few books of the Bible, in the instructions from God given to Moses, so that he can give that to all the children of Israel. It's very interesting. What do you guys think? Any comments or questions?
Well, that was really good. No, I think you pretty much hit it on the head there, buddy. Yeah, because that's the biggest problem with a lot of people today, is that they basically not only get sucked into the world's ways, but they basically will end up finding that thing that will push them away from God, instead of staying around I wouldn't say the same people, staying around their church family, making friends that don't go to church, making friends that actually are away from it. They start basically taking on their actions, taking on their motives, all that good stuff, and I should say all that bad stuff, and then basically pushing themselves away, pushing family away. I know, because my brother was that way. He surrounded himself with negative people, and he basically pushed church, pushed family, pushed everything away, because he wanted to choose on his own what he thought was best for himself, instead of the ones that were there for him, who in a way were trying to motivate him, trying to lead him to the church, trying to lead him with the family instead of pushing him away. But sometimes I realize that sometimes people have to experience, I wouldn't say trauma, but more or less experience hard times before they can find their way back.
Wow, yeah, that's a really good point. No, I think the first point which you made about surrounding yourself with the right people, I think is very true, and it shows up in the history of Israel, because a lot of the things that led them to idolatry throughout their history is the influence of the polytheistic nations that were around them in the land of Canaan, and just even the fact that they were in Egypt for their whole lives. That first generation that left Egypt, they were raised in Egypt, and they were around all their idolatry and polytheism, and lack of worship of the one true God. And that's why they were so weak when they left Egypt, and they were always complaining. And eventually, sadly, Israel was led away from God because they had so many. They were bombarded with a lot of influences of people who did not fear the Lord. So, really good point. Thank you, Anthony. Any other points? If not, we can continue to the next chapter.
You think this passage is also like a little prophecy because he says that your heart will become proud and you will forget? Do you think Moses knew that they were going to forget after doing all those things? And then they did forget, didn't they? After this, when they got into the promised land?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think God knew that they were going to stray away, and so there we get into a really interesting prophecy about how God was going to fulfill his promise to Abraham, that his descendants would be a blessing to all the nations. Because by God having to expulse his people, the people of Israel, into all the nations, he was technically planting seeds of people who at least had basic knowledge of God, of the true God, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so they were going to start planting seeds all over the world. And that's something that we can find in the prophets a lot. But that's a really good point. I think it is. Yeah, God knew that it was going to happen. Otherwise, he wouldn't allow it to happen.
Very cool.
Yeah. All right. Chapter 6.
All righty. Do you want me to share my screen for this?
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, I have to give you permission. How are we doing on time, Jared?
So, what was that?
I was going to ask Jared how we're doing on time. Oops.
So we're at 5 after, and I think we started recording at like 8:20. So I believe we're like 45 minutes in. Does it show a time somewhere on the recording, or I'm just going off of memory?
It shows it. I can see it here. I'm just going to give Spencer permission first to share. Oh, I got it. Should be able to share now.
I can.
Oh, you can? Oh, nice. Oh, wow.
Yeah, let's wait a sec. Okay, we're good. So only the first slide is fancy, but this is everything under the sun. But here we go, Ecclesiastes chapter 6. So I kind of divided it into 3 passages, and I was going to have one of each of you read the passage. So Josh, if you want to kick it off.
Sure thing. Oops. There we go. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him the power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a grievous evil. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For it comes in vanity and goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to the one place?
All righty, awesome. Thank you. So I know that's a lot, so I divided it into just, I think, about 2 or 3 verses each with a little bit of commentary on the side. So with verse 1 and 2, it looks like the preacher is talking about a new evil seen under the sun, just to carry on what he's been describing in the past chapters. And then he goes on to talk about a man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Can you guys think of any examples of the evil that the preacher describes here? So more specifically, yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. So this is the evil. So God gives a man wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires, yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them.
Is this an example in the Bible?
It doesn't have to be. It can be in real life. Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people who become, billionaires, they're and die early. All the stuff that they worked hard for. They don't know who gets it. Maybe they have a will and, they give it to their children, but, they don't end up enjoying it.
Yeah. I think the example that comes to mind is the owner of Walmart, the guy who started Walmart. I can't remember his name, but I know he worked. And then before he could enjoy all of the money and wealth that he had made, he died like pretty early in his age, and all of his family ended up getting it, and they all wish that he could have spent more time with them and been able to enjoy it when in reality he was just working all of that time. So that's the example that comes to mind for me. Anyone else have any examples?
So this isn't really a specific example per se, and I almost might be wrong to say this, but the more I read this, I kind of feel like this could apply to everybody to an extent. Right? Obviously, there's going to be a wide variance in the amount that everybody accumulates. And you might even say, based on certain levels, that some people don't really have like wealth or much in the way of possessions. But we all have a final day here, and we're not gonna, when that final day comes, there's gonna be at least some portion of that we have not enjoyed or used, and that's gonna go on to somebody else. So, and he kind of, the way it's worded in the beginning, it says a man to whom God, so like that, to me, when I thought about that and everything else, I kind of think all of us to an extent have this as a, as like a future, like I think this is going to happen to everybody basically at some point.
That's
very well put. Yeah. What were you going to say, Josh?
That's deep.
Yeah. I think that is definitely factual. So not wrong there. Alrighty. So in the next part, he goes on to say, if a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. So if you back up to this part where he says, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial. So I wanted to point out here, so kind of like the Mosaic law, where the Mosaic law defines what is good, right? It does not satisfy the soul because not one is good, right? So the preacher is kind of slamming the door right here. in every aspect except the door of faith, which is what Jesus, and you see hints of it in the Old Testament as well. But if you see right here, but the scripture imprisoned everything under sin, so that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe. So this is in Galatians 3:22 or 3:20, 3:22, yeah. But yeah, so it says right here, but the scripture imprisoned everything under sin. So I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on what he was referring to here with life's good things, whether that be just in general, like wealth and possessions, or do you think it would be deeper as in like sin and what's good by God's instructions?
I think it could mean the things that are good according to God's instructions. So instead of, being satisfied with God's commandments, or just delighting in God's commandments, like it says in a lot of portions of the Bible, including like in Psalms chapter 1. So the law of the Lord is my delight. I meditate on it day and night. I feel like this is. Oh wait, what was I going to say? I forgot. What was the question again?
So what do you think he's referring to here when he says good things? Like, do you think it's material possessions, or do you think it's a little deeper with what's good in God, like over the sun, right? What's good above the sun and what's good under the sun, I guess, is the question. What do you think he's talking?
Yeah, because I think it's talking about deeper things, like you said, because you see, he's not enjoying because he's not being satisfied with what God gives us. He wants something more. He wants something outside of what God has defined as good, and so that's why his soul is not satisfied.
Okay. So, and then he goes on to say, after, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. And this kind of made me think, I used to, and I think I've asked this question to your dad before, Josh, but I used to think that a child, and by the way, a stillborn child, just, it means the loss of a baby at or after. I shouldn't have put 20 years of pregnancy. That's actually 20 weeks. But that's what it means. It means the loss of a child during a stage in pregnancy. So this kind of reminded me of a question I asked your dad, Josh, about, to me, the longer and longer you live, the more and more sins you commit, right? And the more and more you can kind of like soar up, right, in God's eyes. Whereas a child, he hasn't been born yet, and he's not able, or he or she is not able to commit those sins, right? So I think he can maybe be referring to the idea that it's better to not be born than it is to live. And that's kind of a bitter statement and very dark. But that's just something I've pondered as well before.
Yeah. But I think here, though, it's saying that it's better to not be born if the way you live is like this man who has all these things, everything he needs, but he's so ungrateful that he can't be happy. He can't be satisfied.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. And then he goes on to say, for it comes in vanity and goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. So yeah, any questions there?
What do you think it means? It refers to when it says a father who has 100 children, because it's kind of crazy.
So yeah, I looked into that, and it looks like back in the day, and it might not be like this nowadays, but a man's dream was to have many, many children and live many, many years. That was kind of like the American dream, like back in the day, is to have lots of children and live many years. And yeah, I think maybe that made you very well respected. And I don't know if back then people competed to see how many children they could have, but I think it's about building like, not an empire, but generations.
So it's funny you kind of say that, because when I was reading that and sort of interpreting it myself, I looked at it as like a man being his own creator, and kind of having like a level of power and like gratification because of that. But I don't know if that's necessarily a
I think that's really good that you mentioned that, because it's going to get to later in the chapter about man like arguing with God and trying to have power. So yeah, very good point. All right, moving on. So moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. So it's still talking about the stillborn child here, how a child in the womb has not seen the sun yet or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. So any thoughts here? And I know we kind of talked about it, but any more thoughts here about how a stillborn child might find rest rather than a person who has lived many, many years?
Well, the stillborn child doesn't really know anything different, and aside from just not, really getting to live, other than that, the stillborn child would have a level of peace. Whereas if you live a long time and you go and try to have all these things that you desire and you still don't find a level of peace in it, then it kind of, it ends up basically being hevel, right? Because it's ultimately not really fulfilling you.
Exactly. Yeah. And then he mentions like whether you live 1,000 years twice over, or you're not even born yet, everyone goes to the same place, which is the grave. Everyone dies, right? So moving on to the next portion. Jared, do you want to read this actually?
Yeah.
3 verses.
All the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage has the wise man over the fool? And what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. This is also vanity and a striving after wind.
Awesome. Thank you. So here he mentions how food does not satisfy the soul. And I kind of wanted, and it's funny you had Deuteronomy 8, Josh, but I was going to say, to elaborate more of what Deuteronomy is, it's I think it's 3 speeches that Moses gives to the Israelites on the plains of Moab shortly before they enter the promised land. So I wanted to show just like a little history lesson. So back in the day, this was the kingdom of Moab. So just imagine Moses is speaking to the Israelites shortly before they enter the promised land, which was Canaan, I believe, which is now called Israel. So they're going from the plains of Moab and then to the first battle of Jericho, and then they slowly make their way into the promised land. So I wanted to go to Deuteronomy chapter 8 again. And you'll see in verse 3, Moses says, "And he humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord." So he's kind of saying our appetite is not satisfied by actual food, but I think by things above the sun, I think is what he's trying to say here. And then also Jesus repeats the same exact thing in Matthew chapter 4 when being tried by the devil himself. And he goes, "But he answered, it is written." So it's written in Deuteronomy, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." So Jesus even emphasizes this point, which I think is a very important point to know, that physical bread is nowhere near as close as the spiritual bread, I guess, the word of God, which would be the bread of life, I guess you can compare it to. So yeah,
Like that.
I thought that was a cool connection. Yeah. And then And then he goes on to say, for what advantage has the wise man over the fool? And what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? So I just kind of had a little note here. The necessities in this life are the same for a wise man and a fool. So whether you're a wise, rich man, right, or a poor, like dumb fool, right? Like everyone needs to eat. Everyone has to use the bathroom. Like everyone sleeps or they need sleep. Everyone gets sick. Everyone dies. So all the aspects of life are really the same, no matter who you are, right? So better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. So what do you guys think the preacher means by the sight of the eyes in verse 9? So better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite.
I think it talks about having a life that is illuminated. I think one of the metaphors of God's word is that it's a light for our paths, and that allows us to be able to see where we're going, so that we don't stumble. Rather, when you are living a life that is, I guess, controlled by your appetite, by wanting more and more of something material, like food, like bread, then you're going to be distracted.
Good. I think your second thought, this part right here, wandering of the appetite, I think that's what came to mind for me. I also think so when I read this, better is the sight of the eyes, I kind of thought maybe he's trying to say the things that you can actually see, you should be thankful for, right? They're blessings, versus things that you don't have, that you can't see right in front of you. It's not good to be wandering, right, and desiring those things that you don't have, which is a little bit like coveting, which we talked about in the last Bible study. But that's what I saw from here.
Oh yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Any other ideas? Side of the eyes. All right.
I really liked how you connected verse 7 with Deuteronomy 8 and Matthew 4 about how man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes out of the mouth of God. And I asked myself, what are the words that have come out of his mouth? Like the words that he's literally said, and they've been written directly from his mouth.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think?
So are you referring, so Jesus speaks words directly out of his mouth, right? Those are direct quotes. But also I think in the Old Testament, for example, when God gives the commandments to Moses, he's obviously speaking to Moses, right? Or when he gives instructions to Noah to build an ark, God gives instructions. Here's what you have to do to survive, right? So that's kind of what I see in that.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. That's right. I feel like it says in Psalms that we should meditate on his words day and night. And at the time that was written, the only words that were available to be read weren't the Psalms or the Proverbs or the prophets. They were the Torah. The only thing that they had was the Torah.
Yeah, the first 5 books of the Bible. Yeah.
And so his commandments are like food. We're supposed to meditate on them every day. We can't go a day without eating unless we're fasting for a purpose. But generally, we have to eat every day to be healthy. And it's the same spiritually.
Yep, very good point. All righty. Well, thank you, Josh. And for the final passage, Anthony, you want to give a read? This one's a little shorter than last time.
First, buddy, I would be more than happy to. All right, ready?
Yep.
Whatever has come to be has already been named. And it is known what man is, and that he is not able to to dispute with one stranger than he. The more words, the more vanity, and what is the advantage to man? Or what is the advantage to man? For who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, while he passes like a shadow? For who can tell the man what will be after him under the sun?
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm sorry, but that was not perfect, but it's okay. All right.
Awesome. So first you'll see that whatever has come to be has already been named, and it is known what man is, and that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. So right here, the preacher is making a statement that God is stronger than man. He's clearly defining that there's a difference between the power in God and man. And I wrote a little note that many people today believe they can fight God instead of recognizing their defeat and surrendering to him. A lot of people don't like the idea of surrendering to someone above them that they can't necessarily see. And I just thought this was a really good verse with what's going on in our times. And then I had a question to you guys. What does the preacher mean by the more words in verse 11? So right here, the more words, the more vanity. And what is the advantage to man? And before you guys answer, I was looking at a few different translations, and there were some translations that had this as the more things, which to me made more sense because we're talking about things that are vanity, right? But I think if you look at the literal translation, it translates to words. So I wanted to get you guys' thoughts on what could be these words that create more vanity and is disadvantageous to man.
So one thing that I kind of look at, more words, right? So words can lead to ideas, different perceptions. And so like, to me, I kind of think about this kind of tying it back to your first point there. Like, I think people are believing that they can go against God because they are understanding a different idea of what they think they should be, like a certain like a self-actualization, I guess. And so to kind of like bring it back to this here, more words could just be, like more ideas, visions, things kind of like that, I guess. So not necessarily material, but like, I don't know. Yeah. Like ideas and visions for themselves and what they believe they are and want to be.
Yeah, I thought of that too as like ideas like maybe being like ideas such as like being selfish, right? Or ungrateful. I couldn't really come up with what the words could really mean. Josh, do you have any ideas there?
I have a couple ideas. One, I think along the lines of what Jared was saying is that the context is, the name that has been given to man by God, one who is strong, who's already defined him. And when we want to define ourselves outside of that, we're adding vanity, things that are meaningless. When we want to add, that we are these great things outside of humility, then I think we're adding more words to our definition of ourselves.
I really like that. Yeah, I think it comes down to maybe identity in a sense. So like even today, people are just adding a lot more words. About their identity, like, and they're changing how God defines them, right? And you can see it in the English dictionary, how many words are actually being added. So I thought this could maybe mean actual words that are being added and that are vanity, that go against what God says. Or it can mean, like Jared said, like ideas, right?
So I guess maybe I didn't clarify that good enough, but like self-actualization and identity to me are a little bit synonymous, right? Like you're self-actualizing what you believe you should be, and that to me is tied directly to like your identity.
Exactly. Yeah. And you have thoughts that turn into words. Exactly. Awesome. And then he asks 2 questions to conclude this chapter. So he says, for who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow. And that's question 1. So he's kind of asking the question, what is good for us? If it's not all of these other things like material possessions, all this vanity thing, what is good for us? And I think that answer would be the bread of life that we talked about before. I think that's the conclusion to that question. I don't know if you guys have any other ideas there. But also he asked another question, which we haven't gotten more into Ecclesiastes, but I don't think this question is answered yet. So he says, for who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? So I wrote a couple of notes that in the Old Testament, there was uncertainty of what the afterlife looked like. So even today in Judaism, Jews have so many different views on what the afterlife could be, and there's not a consistent vision of it, right? And to me, when he asked this question, I think it's really cool that he's asking it, because he says, for who can tell man? I think he's kind of implying that God is the only one who can tell man. And he might even be referring to Jesus, who literally tells man in person what will be after under the sun, like what's above the sun. So I kind of wrote uncertainty of afterlife in the Old Testament versus the certainty of afterlife shown in the New Testament when Jesus comes. And yeah, and I don't know if he answers this question later in the chapter or later in the book. I don't know if you know that, Josh, but yeah.
Not sure. I guess we'll find out.
All right. Any other comments? That's the end of chapter 6. Any thoughts?
Just say that that was really good. You made really good connections to a lot of parts of the Bible that were very applicable, and then explained what it was saying here. And it made me think of what it says in, I think, one of the Psalms. I can't remember which one, but it says that the sum of God's word, the sum of God's words are truth. Yeah. In other words, it takes the Bible to interpret the Bible. So when a passage is confusing, we don't have to like look outside of the Bible, but
we go to
yeah,
other places, to confirm it.
Yeah. So yeah, that was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Awesome. Alrighty, well, if that's it, thank you all very much for doing the readings and all of your commentary.